Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Larry Lederman, and I'm the chair of the Ambassador Speaker Series at Carleton University. Welcome to the first of 4 sessions in this academic year. Before introducing our featured speaker, the High Commissioner of Jamaica, Her Excellency Janice Miller, I would like to first recognize some of our guests. The High Commissioner of Trinidad and Tobago, His Excellency Garth Chator. Where are you? There he is. The Ambassador of Ukraine, His Excellency Andriy Shevchenko. The Ambassador of Estonia, Her Excellency Gita Kalmet. The Ambassador of Guyana, Her Excellency Clarissa Rio. The Ambassador of Haiti, His Excellency France Lioto. The Ambassador of Benin, His Excellency Koman Gutonji. The Ambassador of Kazakhstan, His Excellency Konstantin Zigalov. We're also pleased to have representatives from various high commissions and embassies in Ottawa. I would also like to welcome our former Canadian ambassadors, the former Canadian ambassador to the OAS in Chile, Paul Durand, former Canadian ambassador to Guyana and Venezuela, John Graham, former Canadian ambassador to Finland, Craig McDonald, former Chargé d'Affaires in Ecuador, Jack Kepper, and the former Canadian High Commissioner to Jamaica, Robert Reddy. We are also pleased to see representatives of the Canadian government, the National Gallery of Canada, and students and faculty from Carleton University. It is now my pleasure to invite the Director of the Norman Paterson School of International Affairs, Dr. Dane Rowlands, to introduce our distinguished speaker. Dane.
Thank you, Larry, and thank you again for organizing this year's Ambassador Speaker Series here at Carleton University, and this is the inaugural event for that series this year. I never know about the timing, whether we should be doing Jamaica in the middle of winter or the middle of like a warmer time period. I'm not sure. I think we're going to be reminded that we're meteorologically challenged in Canada as a consequence, but hopefully the timing will be good, and I'm sure we'll all look forward to the address that you have. So we are delighted that our first speaker for the series, for the academic session this year at Carleton, is the High Commissioner of Jamaica, Her Excellency Janice Miller. Mrs. Miller is a graduate of the University of the West Indies, where she completed undergraduate and postgraduate work in history, politics, and international relations, and she went on to study further programs at Oxford University, and indeed courses, she just was reminding me that Carleton University put on in Jamaica as well at the postgraduate level. So she's also taking courses at the University of Beijing. She has served at the Jamaican Permanent Mission to the United Nations as Counselor for Political Affairs, and also represented Jamaica during its chairmanship of the Group of 77. She's also served the permanent representative of Jamaica on the mission to the International Seabed Authority, and has been on various boards, including on Maritime Authority in Jamaica. Prior to her appointment to Canada as High Commissioner, which was in October 2014, so you've already survived a couple of Canadian winters, which is good. She was acting Undersecretary in the Multilateral Affairs Division of Jamaica's Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade. So please welcome Her Excellency High Commissioner of Jamaica, Janice Miller.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rowlands, for your introduction. And good afternoon, everyone. It's indeed a real pleasure to be here this afternoon. And let me first of all thank the incomparable Larry Lederman, chair of the Ambassador Speaker Series of NITSPO, for his very kind invitation to be here this evening, as well as all the other officials of Carleton University. I would also like to thank all of you, in particular my diplomatic colleagues and members of the Jamaican community, a number of whom I'm very familiar with, for your presence here. I also wish to recognize, I know Larry has already done so in a special way, Robert Reddy, who was the former Canadian High Commissioner to Jamaica and the Bahamas. Larry asked me to participate in this Ambassador Speaker Series, a request which was hard to refuse, just before the Olympic Games, which were held recently in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. It is therefore not difficult to ascertain why and how I chose the topic on which I will speak this afternoon, given the stellar performance of the Jamaican athletes in Rio. I begin my presentation with a quote from the Prime Minister of Jamaica, the Most Honorable Andrew Holness, who, in his message for the 54th anniversary of Jamaican independence on 6 August 2016, stated the following, and I quote, "Our athletic prowess is one indication of our excellence as a people. It is a metaphor of our distinction, a distinction manifested in our music, with us punching way above our weight, by creating a genre, reggae, which is known and revered globally, and in our vibrant culture, which has made its indelible stamp on the world in the areas of cuisine, fashion, dance, sculpture, and theater. That a country with a population of approximately 2.8 million people can have the fastest man and woman in the world and produce an artiste, Bob Marley, whose single One Love the BBC could have designated Theme of the Millennium, and whose album Exodus Time magazine could have voted Album of the Century, is indeed thrilling." End of quotation. These are indeed significant achievements for our country, the largest English-speaking island in the Caribbean, with an area of 4,411 square miles, or 11,424 square kilometers. To put this in a Canadian context, Jamaica is roughly twice the size of Prince Edward Island and approximately 1/5 the size of Nova Scotia, the next smallest Canadian province. We have a strong tradition of British democratic rule inherited from our colonial history when Britain captured the island from Spain in 1655. British colonial rule has influenced our current political and social structures, including our language, and the main drivers of the Jamaican economy are alumina, tourism, remittances, and a large informal sector. In fact, you can see here on my right an example of our tourism product and the beauty of Jamaica. We have an economy which is highly trade-oriented, and exports and imports of goods and services have represented, on average, over 90% of GDP. Our income from remittances, that comes from the over 3 million Jamaicans or persons of Jamaican descent who reside all over the world, but particularly in Canada, the United States, and the United Kingdom. We unfortunately do have an extremely high debt-to-GDP ratio, which in 2015 was recorded at 120.4%. This is down from figures of 2014, when our debt-to-GDP ratio was 132%. Based on historical and contemporary definitions of size, Jamaica satisfies the criteria ascribed to small states in terms of geographic and demographic realities, as well as the characteristics of a narrow natural resource base, small market size, and an open economy. Historically, there has been a tendency by some writers to describe smallness as a debilitating feature which hinders economic development and the execution of an effective foreign policy. While Jamaica's current economic performance and level of development may not be comparable to other small states, as for example Singapore, it can be posited that in spite of a history of colonialism and independence, and oftentimes unfavorable global economic factors, Jamaica has, notwithstanding its size, been able to make notable contributions on the global stage, in particular in the exercise and implementation of its foreign policy. The global impact of Jamaica, therefore, has to be considered as much more than its achievements and influence in music, athletics, and culture. My presentation will make brief mention of some of the contributions at an international relations level, which will primarily be from a multilateral perspective, and which have demonstrated the ability of Jamaica to shape elements of the global discourse, as well as the expansion of international law. I will also provide a brief overview of our relationship with Canada and conclude with an identification of a few areas for possible future engagement. For the Jamaicans in the audience, you'll know that one of our well-known maxims is, "We little, but we talawa." This is good Jamaican patois, our indigenous language, which describes how we view ourselves. It is difficult to fully explain this in standard English, but the most approximate translation is, "Do not underestimate us. We are strong, we are small, but we are strong and fearless and can do anything we set our minds to. It was Jamaican national hero Marcus Messiah Garvey who said, later popularized by Bob Marley, that we need to emancipate ourselves from mental slavery. None but ourselves can free our minds. For Jamaica, then, small size is a matter of perception and is not a barrier to effecting change. Our history is replete with numerous examples where size has not been a constraint to influence or impact. We also recognize that in promoting strength, it is also necessary to promote resilience. For some, Jamaicans' description of itself and its actions at the international level could be described as audacious. Jamaicans are proud of our audacity, as it has allowed us to fight for freedom from slavery, end colonial rule, and seek to chart our path as an independent nation. It was this same audacity that led us in 1959, when we were not yet independent and when our external relations were still managed by Britain, to be the first country to place a trade embargo on then apartheid South Africa. Jamaica was consistent and unequivocal in its opposition to apartheid and was among those countries which worked to increase international attention to apartheid, including in sports. We became a member of the United Nations on 18 September 1962, and since then we have participated actively in the multilateral system. Our work in the UN has focused on encouraging international attention on matters including, but not limited to, human rights, decolonization, economic cooperation and indebtedness, women and children, small arms and light weapons, peace and security, the rule of law, small island developing states, and climate change. 1 year after becoming a member of the United Nations, Jamaica's policy statement at the 1963 General Assembly proposed that 1968 be designated the International Year for Human Rights. This proposal was intended to mark the 20th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. In making this proposal, Jamaica had two main objectives. Firstly, we were of the view that the year should be an event which would highlight and bring new attention to the principles on human rights in the UN Charter and the promises included in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which, up to that time in the 1960s, had not been fully elaborated. Secondly, Jamaica was also of the view that the year should be a target to encourage renewed public commitment from the UN and its member states in order to give effect to the principles of the Universal Declaration. In June 1967, the UN General Assembly also accepted Jamaica's proposal for an international conference to review progress in the field of human rights. That conference was held in Iran. Jamaica's activist position in human rights following soon after our membership of the United Nations was informed by our newly acquired status of sovereignty, as we were eager to elaborate an independent foreign policy at a time when the dynamics of East-West Cold War confrontation and North-South colonialism were prevalent. As we sought as a small country to find our own space in a world dominated by power blocs, we found it necessary and practical, based on our own historical experience, to forge a close collaboration with African countries in support of an end to apartheid and decolonization, as well as efforts to end discrimination based on race or religion. Jamaica's activist agenda on human rights in the 1960s has been studied by Dr. Stephen Jensen, a Danish researcher. The findings of Dr. Jensen, described in his book, The Making of International Human Rights, the 1960s, Decolonization, and the Reconstruction of Global Values, indicate that much of the present-day international human rights system was constructed and shaped by developing countries, with Ghana, Jamaica, Liberia, and the Philippines taking a lead role. This, according to Dr. Jensen, was due to the little attention paid at the time by industrialized countries to any elaboration of an international human rights regime. The leadership role played by Jamaica and other developing countries in elaborating the international human rights framework ended with the beginning of the 1970s, when developed countries began taking an increased interest in human rights. The role played by the developing world in the decade of the 1960s in calling on the developed world to assist to accept universal human rights as a matter deserving full and proper international treatment and attention is of historical note. This is of particular importance in these days, especially given the current tendency by some to criticize developing countries for adopting anti-human rights stances. Again, at a time when the wind of Cold War tensions would have been buffeting a small state, Jamaica in 1969 took the unprecedented action of joining the Organization of American States without first breaking diplomatic relations with Cuba or participating in sanctions or in the embargo against Cuba. Jamaica also supported the entry of the People's Republic of China to the United Nations in 1973. Later on, at the beginning of the 21st century, when peace and security dominated the international discourse, Jamaica was unafraid to criticize the 2003 U.S. invasion of Iraq. When Ambassador Pardo of Malta called for the elaboration of a regime to govern oceans, the Constitution of the Seas, Jamaica immediately played a keen and active role in the early stages of the crafting of the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. This position was based on a firm support for equity, as well as support for the equal participation of large and small states in sharing in the global commons of the oceans. Jamaican negotiators worked along with colleagues from many other countries in the Preparatory Commission for the elaboration of the convention. Jamaica was proud that the adoption of the United Nations Convention and the Law of the Sea led to its signature by 119 countries in Montego Bay in December 1982. The convention is one of the most important legal instruments of the 20th century, as it establishes a universal framework for the management of resources of the oceans and the deep sea bed and their conservation for future generations. Jamaica was honored to have been selected as a site of the International Seabed Authority, becoming one of the few countries and the first in the Caribbean region to host a major United Nations body. And I should share here that when we were lobbying to become the site for the ISA, that was the beginning of what we would call rum diplomacy, but that is another story for another day. Jamaica's firm commitment to human rights and support for equity led to what is now called a Jamaican-inspired proposal, which received the invaluable support and endorsement of the Caribbean Community CARICOM and the African Union in the initial stages, and subsequently the entire international community, for the construction of the permanent memorial to the victims of slavery and the transatlantic slave trade. This monument, the Ark of No Return, was unveiled in March 2015 on the grounds of the United Nations headquarters in New York. Jamaica continues to be profoundly grateful to those countries, some represented here today, which contributed to the trust fund established to build a permanent memorial. I have provided a historical overview of some of the positions adopted by Jamaica, mainly within the context of the United Nations, in which size was not a deterrent to action. Jamaica has also been active in various bodies of the United Nations, as well as in the Commonwealth and the Organization of American States, while numerous Jamaicans have held influential and prominent positions in many global organizations, while others have helped influence negotiating outcomes for many international agreements. Jamaica fully supports the principles of inclusion and participation by all countries, irrespective of size, economic strength, and other considerations in shaping the international framework in which we are all required to operate. We also recognize that a small nation can influence international affairs through cooperation with other countries with similar interests and concerns. Our membership in CARICOM is one of the most important examples of such collective and cooperative action. As mandated under the revised Treaty of Chaguaramas, the legislative basis under which CARICOM operates, CARICOM states try to coordinate their views on various foreign policy and international trade matters, as well as on candidatures. This is in addition to the areas of functional cooperation in which CARICOM engages, as well as the operation of the CARICOM single market and economy. Together, CARICOM countries possess 14 votes within the wider group of Latin America and the Caribbean, which consists of 34 states. It is noteworthy that CARICOM as a group endorsed Canada very early on in its bid for a 2010 United Nations Security Council seat. CARICOM has also taken collective and activist positions in matters of direct relevance to the region. For example, Small Island Developing States, SIDS, climate change, and the Arms Trade Treaty. In the current international scenario, Jamaica is very much aware that in order to exert influence or to even have our voice heard, notwithstanding our record of achievement, it is necessary to forge closer cooperation with countries in Latin America, including through the Association of Caribbean States and the Latin American and Caribbean Community, CELAC. The current tendency by some countries and the potential for others to look inward is also being looked carefully by us. This scenario demonstrates to us as smaller countries the significance of closer cooperation among groups of countries. It is also a reality that small states often face international pressure of one type or another. As we seek to attain national development goals, including the realization of our Vision 2030 National Development Plan, as well as the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals, we are very much aware that balance is important for small states as we navigate the turbulence often experienced in international relations. I will now share a few perspectives on our relationship with Canada. Jamaica has enjoyed a long, dynamic, and mutually beneficial relationship with Canada, evidenced by the establishment of diplomatic relations in 1962, and long before through an active commercial relationship which began in the 1700s when Canada traded salted cod, lumber, and potatoes with the Commonwealth Caribbean in exchange for sugar, molasses, and rum. In fact, Canada has the distinction of being part of Jamaica's national dish, as Canadian salted cod is part of our ackee and saltfish, with the ackee coming from Africa. This is indeed a symbolic metaphor representative of the blending between Jamaica and Canada, one example of how we have come together for common good. Ties between Jamaica and Canada were also forged when Jamaican Maroons came to the shores of Canada in the 1800s. These were the first Jamaicans to come to Canada. This early relationship with Canada, mainly focused on a historical trade arrangement, led to the subsequent opening of branches of Canadian banks in the Caribbean, with the Bank of Nova Scotia opening a branch in Kingston in 1832. This was even before BNS had opened a branch in Toronto. This was followed by the Royal Bank of Canada, which established branches in 1882, and the Canadian Imperial Bank of Commerce, CIBC, in 1920. In 1921, Canada appointed its first full-time trade commissioner to Jamaica in support of the ongoing commodities trade. Fast forward to 2016, and we have a situation wherein CIBC and RBC are no longer in Jamaica, and some Canadian banks have reduced the limit of their exposure and closed branches or moved critical operations from the Caribbean region, citing as reasons the 2008 global financial crisis, the loss of profits, and the need for compliance under international financial measures to limit money laundering and curtail terrorism financing. For Jamaica, any potential termination of correspondent banking services will have negative implications, especially in relation to remittance transfers, the payment of pensions, and the facilitation of trade financing. Fortunately, the Jamaican government has taken the necessary steps to comply with international anti-money laundering, counter-terrorism financing, AML, CTF measures. But de-risking is of concern to the entire Caribbean region, given the impact on economic viability. Jamaica's relationship with Canada has also been underpinned by common values. We are both members of the Commonwealth and follow similar legal and political systems. We also have the same head of state and are both members of the OAS. We also have a strong history of people-to-people contact through tourism. Canada is the second largest source of tourists to the Jamaican market. Migration, based on latest census figures, approximately 300,000 Jamaicans call Canada home, and business through Canadian investment in the bauxite aluminum industry, renewable energy, the hotel industry, and business product outsourcing, to name a few. There is also collaboration at other levels, and Jamaica benefits from a robust program of assistance and cooperation from Canada in areas which include security and justice sector reform, educational scholarships, disaster relief, governance, and defense training. Canada is Jamaica's third largest trading partner after the USA and Europe, and is also a major investment partner and a significant source of overseas development assistance, second only to the European Union. Another aspect of the strong relationship between our two countries is that Canada represents Jamaica and other Caribbean countries on the boards of the International Monetary Fund, IMF, and the World Bank, where Canada's support has been critical, especially for the current IMF support program in place for Jamaica. Approximately 6% of Jamaica's exports to Canada are under the 1986 Non-Reciprocal Caribbean-Canada Trade Agreement, CARIBCAN, which governs the trading relationship between CARICOM and Canada. In the 1980s, then Prime Minister Edward Seaga had approached United States President Reagan, pointing to the developmental benefits that could accrue to the Caribbean through the implementation of a mini Marshall Plan through a one-way preferential trade agreement. The result was the Caribbean Basin Initiative. The example provided by the CBI allowed for the introduction of CARIBCAN. As CARIBCAN is discriminatory, a most favored nation MFN waiver is required from the WTO. The most recent MFN waiver sought by Canada from the WTO was approved by the WTO in July 2015 and will expire at the end of December 2023. I should mention another area of mutual benefit to Jamaica and Canada, namely the Seasonal Agricultural Workers Program, which this year is celebrating 50 years of its existence. Under this program, approximately 8,000 Jamaicans come to Canada annually to work on farms, and this has been of mutual benefit both to Canadian employers and to the workers and their families. Of course, this is not to say that there are not areas where Canada and Jamaica hold differing views, but we continue to engage in dialogue as necessary, as these differences have never been immovable stumbling blocks in our friendship. Given the relative disparity in size and economic development between Canada and Jamaica, it would be easy to see how this relationship could be lopsided in favor of one over the other. It is a testimony to the strength of Canada's relationship with Jamaica, as well as perhaps Canada's own worldview, that our friendship and relationship has been based for the most part on mutual respect and consideration. Jamaica also values the fact that as friends, we can be open and candid with Canada in spite of size and level of economic development. With this in mind, and given the current increased engagement by Canada on international matters of relevance to Jamaica, we're hopeful that issues which, due to their magnitude and complexity, could overwhelm Jamaica's developmental prospects will continue to receive the attention of Canada, including in its engagement with Jamaica. Chief among these is climate change and the undertakings given by Canada to climate change financing. Disaster risk reduction, loss and damage, and adaptation remain critical to Jamaica's efforts in coping with the impacts of climate change. Canada's current review of its international development assistance framework is also of keen interest to Jamaica. We have benefited greatly from assistance provided by Canada. Our designation, however, as an upper middle-income country makes us ineligible to receive certain types of concessionary financing from international financial institutions. This means that our progress in certain areas has come at the cost of accumulation of increased debt. And you recall the figures that I gave early on in my presentation as to the level of our debt. So we continue to urge the IFIs to review their financing policy and how middle-income countries are graduated from development financing, including through the use of GDP as a sole criterion. Attention to this from development partners such as Canada could assist. The Prime Minister of Jamaica, just last week, has also called on the global community to converge around a highly indebted middle-income country initiative underpinned by the principle that highly indebted countries that have inherent structural vulnerabilities, such as small size or susceptibility to the effects of climate change, and which responsibly and faithfully service their debt, should be facilitated with assistance in the form of investment, favorable trade, technology transfer, security, and energy. Jamaica is also watching with keen interest the discussions in Canada in relation to marijuana. This follows on our own experiences of last year, where we have introduced regulations which allow for the decriminalization of small amounts of marijuana, the possession of that, while carving out use for religious and medical purposes as permissible under existing international convention. We do believe that the potential exists for medical marijuana to be a major income earner. We are also cognizant of the significance of the large population in Canada. And as noted in the publication Jamaicans in Canada, which was produced to commemorate the 50th anniversary of Jamaican independence, it was noted that Jamaicans in Canada, or Canadians of Jamaican heritage, have over the years broken racial and other barriers through full participation in areas such as academia, athletics, law, labor unions, policing, justice, media, medicine, philanthropy, and politics. As I conclude, I would just like to sum up by saying that small states such as Jamaica have contributed and continue to have the potential to positively contribute to international discourse through various forms of engagement. Collective action with other countries with similar interests is important, as global issues such as climate change, terrorism, health pandemics, and others involve all states, irrespective of size. Smaller states benefit from valued partnerships, including through bilateral relationships in dealing with the impact of global matters. Jamaica will therefore continue to explore the strengthening of its long-standing and multifaceted relationship with Canada and remains open to new avenues and areas of cooperation between our two countries. Given the length and depth of our relationship, it is tempting for both Jamaica and Canada to take our relationship for granted. Jamaica does not subscribe to this view. While we would never argue that the relationship is equal on all fronts, nonetheless, we do believe that there are areas where Jamaica can bring added value to Canada. We remain optimistic that Canada feels the same. Thank you.
You spoke of Carleton, which has expired. It dates from the time of Prime Minister Mulroney and Prime Minister Seaga on the Caribbean side, and it was a great success. But with its expiration, there was an effort to try to pull it back together again. That seems to have failed. And the reasons, I think, probably lie on both sides. But my understanding is that difficulty on the Caribbean side was a failure to get together, to make common cause so that the Caribbean could engage with Canada. And the same problem has arisen, I think, with the EU, so that they could come with common terms. But this failed, as I understand it. I may be terribly out of date. I wonder if you could, you finished on a note of optimism, whether you can give us any optimism about pulling Caribcan or its successor together.
Thank you. As I respond to your question, I'm very conscious that Robert is in the audience, and Robert was the trade negotiator on the Canadian side, the lead negotiator, when we were trying to negotiate a Canada-CARICOM free trade agreement, and I think the discussion started in 2007, were they? 2007 when it was initiated. I did make mention that Jamaica's trading relationship and a few other countries in the Caribbean, it is still governed by CARIBCAN, and because of its discriminatory nature, Canada has been very good with the stalling of the trade agreement negotiations to ask for a waiver from the WTO. And so that waiver has been granted and will continue until 2023. Of course, there are other aspects of the trade relationship that we have been graduated from certain, the generalized system of preferences and other aspects. But one of the aspects of CARICOM is that we do come together to negotiate as a group, and one of these was on the free trade agreement. We negotiate, and that was one of our very long and complex trade discussions. I think on both sides there was disappointment that we were not able to come to a conclusion when the negotiating mandate expired for Canada in 2014. So, was it 2014, 2014? 2015, yes. So, whereas, and this, I think there were a number of gaps. I won't go into any details that we tried to bridge. We were not able to bridge those gaps. But I think we remain optimistic that the door for discussion has not been closed. The timing of whether such a discussion will ever reopen, quite frankly, is really up to Canada. I think that the fact that we do have the waiver up to 2023 has provided a window still for Caribbean countries.
Yeah, my name is Emeka Ndukwe. I'm a retired diplomat. I retired in Canada here, 2005. Well, this is 2016. I'm just wondering why Jamaica still retains the constitutional monarchy and, you know, has the same head of state with Canada. You know, okay, second question, brief short question. You know, given the long-standing relationship between Canada and Jamaica, I was just wondering whether, you know, Jamaica, with its human resources, could not do the kind of, you know, job that India is doing, like being a major call center that would, you know, service the Western Hemisphere. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you very much. Let me answer your second question first. Actually, we have started call center operations in Montego Bay, and this is where we speak about not just call center operations, we're business product outsourcing. So we have a number of other services that we offer, such as accounting and I think information technology, for some, including for Canadian companies, some from the United States, some from Canadian companies. And so we have some major companies that are there because, of course, we are leveraging the fact that we are an English-speaking country and, of course, our proximity to North America, as well as our relative proximity as well to the rest of Latin America. In relation to your first question, I dare say a number of Jamaicans are also asking that question, and this is why there has been a call, including by some parliamentarians, for Jamaica to become a republic. I believe in our throne speech for 2016, I think it was mentioned that Jamaica is going to take steps to seek Republican status in the near future. As to the timing of that, I can't tell, and it may have to undergo other aspects within Jamaica before that can be realized.
Hi there, good afternoon. I'm Jacqueline Lawrence. One of the things you started off was, you know, Jamaica's motto, Witalawa. What have you observed in terms of what Canadians can learn from us with that particular strength that we bring to the table?
Well, I think one of the things is that being able to speak up or to represent once you have a position that's based on a principle and based on the fact that you can make a difference. I think in terms of Canadians learning from a country like Jamaica is that I think it's a bit difficult for me to answer that because Canada is a very multicultural, very, you know, diverse country as well in its own way. Is that taking account of everything, that all views can contend, and that you're not to underestimate anybody or anything, that everyone has a place and a role to play in whatever you try to do. And I think Canada itself has been, from my observations, has been learning from that, or is in fact practicing rather that type of approach.
Thank you very much, High Commissioner. My name is Paul Durand. I wanted to speak a moment about the security cooperation that Canada has with the CARICOM region. I understand we have a program of long-standing, the military cooperation program, and that it's centered in Jamaica. I wonder if you could just give me your impressions of how that's working. Is it adequately resourced? Should it have more resources? Thank you.
Thank you. To my mind, it is operating quite effectively. The training, I think, not only is Canada doing on-the-ground training in Jamaica, but members of our military forces are able to come to Canada to benefit from training here, as well as Jamaica has been seeking to obtain equipment and other supplies from Canadian defense contractors. In terms of, I guess, as a country, we would always say we want more as we can, especially in a country that is really facing severe security considerations. I made mention of small arms and light weapons. That still continues. We term that in Jamaica as our weapon of was it non, what do we say, a weapon of mass destruction, yes, because small arms and light weapons, they kill a number of people, and that still continues to be a difficulty in Jamaica. So anything, and in fact, we were very encouraged that I think that Canada has signaled that it's going to sign the Arms Trade Treaty, and we hope that they will move forward to early ratification. Because we think that's also a way of giving some impetus and some support to an issue that affects not just Jamaica, but the entire Caribbean region. And as I mentioned, the entire CARICOM was very active on the Arms Trade Treaty. I think as terrorism and other aspects are still quite a big part of the international discourse, the work by Canada in helping in training or sensitization or even in other aspects, not just in defense itself, would also be useful.
Carmen Hamilton from the Jubilee Church. Now that they're discovering that marijuana is good medically, and we know that it grows a lot in Jamaica, is Jamaica doing anything to sort of study it so that they themselves can find out the value so that when it does break loose, Jamaica can be a good supplier?
Well, thank you, Pastor Hampton. I should mention that at the University of the West Indies, there is a project that is underway to look and to examine the benefits of marijuana. In fact, they're cultivating, they received permission to cultivate a few plants and to conduct research into the medicinal aspects of marijuana. This is not to say that work wasn't going on before. We do have some private sector persons and some other persons also in the state sector who have been researching. It is very well documented. The uses of medical marijuana, I won't go into what Jamaicans themselves, how we know of the medicinal benefits, but Jamaican researchers and scientists, of cannabisol and with the use of marijuana for glaucoma. What we are also very cognizant of, though, is that the present international conventions to which Jamaica is a signatory they put a limitation on how much you can deal with marijuana, including in its trade. And I think this is one of the reasons that at the recently concluded special session on drugs, which was held at the UN, Jamaica was among those countries that was calling that for a review of how the international conventions are framed as they deal with marijuana, particularly with medical marijuana, because we're very aware that doing the medical marijuana research and development is one thing, but being able to trade in marijuana itself is another. We probably will be able to trade in the products, the medicinal products. And of course, that's why we're very keenly interested in what Canada is doing in terms of its own regime as it relates to cannabis.
Hi, good evening. Welcome to Canada.
Thank you.
My name is Hermine Goodrich, and I have two questions to ask you. First of all, what is the current population in Jamaica right now?
Approximately 2.8 million.
Okay. And out of 2.8 million, only 300,000 is in Canada alone.
Well, I am using the statistics from the 2006 census, so we're eagerly awaiting the findings of the 2016 census so that we can give a more accurate figure.
Also, too, I am a child of a mother who's Jamaican, and she's here. And she's been here for quite a while. Nonetheless, growing up and getting the feedbacks of what's going on back home and this and this and that, my concern is the education Where is the education today for the Jamaicans that can't afford it?
Well, we have an education system that allows for persons to go to basic school, primary school, and secondary school without having to pay. So it's just, and we also have other programs in place, the PATH program being one that supports students who come from circumstances that would not allow them to afford to go to school, to be supported, and that's a program that works through the Ministry of Labor and Social Security. One of the difficulties we find, Jamaica still has some very good educational outputs, and of course we do have universities, tertiary level institutions, quite a number of them. It has expanded from not just the University of the West Indies, but quite a number now, including not just in Kingston, across the island. Our graduates are still very well sought out. One of the difficulties we face is that we suffer from brain drain when our graduates they finish our university or tertiary level education. They're snapped up by North America, including Canada.
So thank you, Larry, and thank you, High Commissioner. It was interesting for me, coming from New Brunswick, which we went from Prince Edward Island to Nova Scotia. I'm kind of the third smallest province. And the discourse in Canada is very much kind of the small provinces and the big provinces. And the discourse in Canada is very much that we have a rather large neighbor next door, which shall remain unnamed. And the discourse part of the evening tonight was, again, a small country, small island in a big world. And it's interesting as a reflection of the attitude that was taken to that point. It was very much we're small, but we can do great things. We can punch above our weight. And that, I think, is a really interesting characteristic of the discussion that we have had today. It would have been interesting for me to hear a lot about the plans for Jamaica, for example, to play a role in the new world of trade relationships with growing countries outside of the North American sphere. And it would have been interesting to see whether there are then parallels with the Canadian experience that could be brought together in a much broader alliance than what we've been discussing so far. So I think we do have a long road to go together. We come from a similar type of construction of an identity. And so I think that can carry us quite far in the new world. So thank you very much for being here this afternoon. It's a pleasure for me to present you with your poster presented. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much.